So many recipes for sourdough have you jumping through hoops as they recommend super precise methods of feeding sourdough starters. 50 grams of flour on day 1, 50 grams of water. Day 2, 28 grams of water, 28 grams of flour. Then you have to feed it every day to maintain it even if you don't plan on baking, yada, yada, yada. Then you need a precise baking schedule that ties you up all day. Do you want this much complication just to get some great bread? Lots of beginners are giving up on sourdough because it's too damn complicated. I plan to show you a better way, at least a way that works for me. Be sure to stay to the end of the video to see me eating the bread this recipe makes. In this video, you're going to see the easy way to make sourdough bread, so it works for you, not the other way around. This sourdough bread is nutritious, extremely delicious, and it's perfect for toast, sandwiches, French toast, whatever, with no fancy tools and pretty much zero knowledge. A simple sourdough starter is all you need to get going, and that's easy too. And this method is forgiving and duplicatable every single time. Even if you don't feed your sourdough starter for a week, you can still get this bread to work for you. Oh, about not feeding that starter for a week. Check this out. This starter has been sitting in my fridge for 4 or 5 days, and I did not feed it once. You can see there's not much in there. It's a little crusty. So the first step is to add a little bit of water. Now remember, always use filtered water because most city water has too much chlorine in it, and it really would affect how the starter works. So I just added a little water, and you can see there's no scale under there. I'm not measuring it. I mean, you don't want to fill the jar to the top, but just put, an ounce or two of water, and then you're going to see me here. I just use a fork, and first thing I do is stir up the starter in the water. That way that mixture gets a little sort of homogeneous, so to speak. So the water is kind of, fully melted the starter that's on the bottom. Then I take my flour, and I use einkorn, which is a wheat. It's an old wheat, an ancient wheat. You can find it in most grocery stores. You don't have to use that, but I like the color and texture of the final bread. So you just start mixing this around, and what the precise measurements are, I don't even know. But what you're looking for is it to look sort of thick like that. Now, you don't want cement, but you also don't want soup, somewhere in the middle. But again, if it's not perfect, it's still going to work great. So what I do is just scrape the remaining starter off, and then I like to just cover it up with a plastic bag like that. And I do change that starter jar every so often. That way it's not so disgusting. But once you have it like that, then it just needs to sit at room temperature, and you're going to wait for it to double. Now, if it doesn't double within about 3 hours, then it's probably not ready to go. If that's the case, just take a spoonful or two out, put in a little more water, mix it, a little more flour, and then wait a little bit longer. But usually it starts to jump right away. So once it's ready to go, I put the water in my mixing bowl. That's 580 grams of water. And then I dump 153 or thereabouts grams of starter in there. I mix it up, and then I add malted barley. You can find that, a link to find that in the show notes. It's available everywhere. I just get it on Amazon. Then there goes my 85 grams of einkorn flour. You could use whole wheat if you'd like. Again, I like the flavor that einkorn gives. Then I need to add in the rest of the flour for the recipe, which is about 767 grams. Now, of course, you're going to need a gram scale. They're about $19 on Amazon. You don't want to use volumetric weighing. You always want to just weigh it. So then I just put this thing on, and what it's doing is it's starting to bring this mass together. The blender's doing its work there. I've got the dough hook on. And if you don't have a blender, you can mix this with a Danish whisk or a wooden spoon, whatever. It doesn't really matter. The idea here is just to make sure that all the flour is hydrated. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you don't want bunches of dry flour on the bottom. You can see that I scraped down the sides here just with a rubber spatula. And notice I have not added any salt. Then I cover this thing up and let it go to sleep for about 1 hour. That's called an auto lease. 2 hours is fine if you forget about it. 45 minutes will work. You just want to give the flour and water time to be together without any salt in the way. Now I add the salt. I use 18 grams of salt. And now here we want to build some strength into the dough. So turn this mixer on. On my KitchenAid, it's like number 2. And you can start to see when it's mixing there, see how it's starting to kind of follow the blade like that? That is gluten networks starting to build, and that's really important to your final dough. So after a few minutes, what I do is cover that up and let that sit. And then we're going to do something called a stretch and fold, but it's a very easy one. It's barely, it's one-handed. I dip my hand in some water and just reach into the bowl, just grab the dough, stretch it a little bit, and then you'll see I just twist a little bit. You know, say I started at 3 o'clock and then I go to 2 o'clock. Just do that 3 or 4 times, cover it back up, and then it sits overnight and it ferments. Now, I like to put it in the refrigerator. The next day, I'll take it out about 1 o'clock in the afternoon and just use a little scraper of some sort. And you don't want to deflate the dough, but you just want to get it out of the bowl and onto your work surface. Now, this recipe makes 2 13-inch loaf pans worth of bread. And for my family, that's like 2 weeks worth of bread. You can freeze it or keep it in the refrigerator and it stays nice and fresh. So now you want to divide it in half. And I like to weigh it because if it's 20 or 30 grams off, that makes a really big difference in the final size of your bread. So just roll it into a little ball. You can wet your hands. It makes it much easier. And I needed to wet my hands a little more in this video. But I made this bread a few times since then, and I just dip my hands in some water, and then it doesn't stick at all. So you can see me here putting it on this little scale, and what I'm doing is trying to get the dough to be within 4 or 5 grams of each other. So now I'll weigh the other one. And this can be a little tricky, but don't stress. If it's one is lighter than the other, just pull a little bit off. And then once you have them about the same size, just start to, and again, I wet the counter a little bit. Just take water and rub it on the counter. You can see I just folded it out. Then I fold the bottom up a little bit. Then I'll fold each side in a little bit. And this is what is called shaping. This is very basic shaping. Once you have it like that, you just fold the top down. You can see I'm kind of pushing with my thumbs against the counter, and that builds a little bit of tension. Just give it a little swat on the side, and there is my pan, and I sprayed that with a little bit of cooking spray. Just put it in there, and then we'll get on to the other one. This is a little more close up. So just take it, give it a few pats, fold the bottom third up, and then fold the sides up. And you can do left side first, right side first. Again, it doesn't matter. Just fold it over. Then I like to grab the top and watch what my thumbs do here. I'm kind of just pushing the dough away, and that gives it a nice stretch. It builds some tension. And if you want to pinch those ends in there, you can, but usually the pan will work out any kind of defect in there. So then you pop them into the pan, and now they need to proof. What I do is put them in a warm oven. I turn my oven on about 100 degrees, and I do that for 2 minutes, turn the oven off, and then I put them in there and let them sit. Depending upon your oven, your dough temperature, and all that, it might take 2 to 3 hours for it to rise up. And you can see when you press on it and it comes back up just about all the way, then you're ready to bake. And some days these rise a little more, some days they don't. Now you can see these, they're baked, and the temperatures will be in the description. It's very easy. 450 degrees to start for about 25 minutes. Then I lower it down and I cook it until the internal temperature is about 203 to 205 degrees. Now this bread is cooled off for several hours, and that's really important. So you can see the inside of this bread has some nice crumb, and it's slicing toast. You don't want giant holes like you see on some of these other YouTube videos, because you put any mayonnaise or butter, it just goes right through the other side and makes a total mess. So here is my very classic English toaster. I bought this thing used on eBay and rebuilt it. It's a beast, and it's very old, and I love it. It makes great toast. And this is where this bread really shines. Now that's a big old heap of salted grass-fed butter. So let's watch me eat it here. It's delicious. All right, time to taste the bread. You saw how good it looked. It's well buttered up. So let's give it a shot. It's really good. It's not so sour that people that find that offensive will notice. It just has the right amount of sour. Really earthy. The wheat that I put in there, that einkorn, it has a very nutty, almost like a caramel flavor. It's hard to describe, but this is excellent bread. I hope you give it a shot. Forget about some good strawberry preserves on here. That really makes it. Organic strawberry preserves. Mmm.